Most companies operate with tunnel vision. They track what they buy from their immediate vendors and what they sell to their direct buyers, treating everything else as a separate environment. The academic supply chain perspective strips away those localized silos. It treats all connected operations, from extracting raw ore to the final retail purchase, as a single, integrated workflow. To understand how that workflow functions, we rely on the standard framework used by the Association for Supply Chain Management, known as the four-party model. This model simplifies the extreme complexity of global trade networks to reveal the baseline structural logic that governs modern commerce. By mapping out this specific structure, managers can pinpoint the exact locations of critical handoffs and spot systemic risks long before they cause a bottleneck. It provides the architectural blueprint required to execute end-to-end planning and measure system-wide performance. Mapping these specific connections provides a roadmap of the interdependencies that link independent companies into a single operational system. There are four primary parties that collectively create, move, and deliver value across this workflow. The first role is the supplier. This is the upstream source, responsible for providing the raw materials, components, or specialized services required to start production. Next is the manufacturer. This party acts as the value transformer, converting those raw inputs into finished or semi-finished goods. Then comes the distributor, acting as the value mover to store and position those goods closer to the market. Finally, there is the customer, the ultimate receiver and consumer of that value. These four designations function as structural roles, defining how value is created and consumed across any industry, regardless of the scale of the companies involved. We can observe how these theoretical roles map to physical reality by tracking the standard sequence of a manufactured product. This diagram mapping the product supply chain shows that the sequence always begins upstream with extraction. Raw materials are harvested or mined from the earth. Those inputs are routed to a production facility, where a manufacturer physically transforms them into a usable product. The finished goods are handed off to a wholesale supplier or distributor, moving the inventory into regional storage. From there, the product is transported to a retail location, making it available for the final consumer to purchase. This isometric model illustrates the actual physical infrastructure required at each step. We see a network of agricultural sites, processing plants, and heavy manufacturing coordinating their output. That massive output relies on heavy distribution centers and transport fleets to bridge the physical gap, pushing goods into local retail hubs and, eventually, the end user's home. Tracking the physical movement of cargo, however, only reveals half of the system's underlying mechanics. A functional supply chain actually operates on a strict principle of bidirectional flow. This diagram illustrating the four flows of supply chain shows the downstream movement we just traced, the physical movement of cargo and finished goods traveling toward the end user. But moving in the exact opposite direction is an upstream flow of information. Customers trigger demand signals, consumption forecasts, and purchase orders that travel back up to the suppliers. Traveling alongside that data is the flow of cash, pushing revenue upstream to fund the next cycle of raw material procurement and production. Binding these opposing forces together is the continuous flow of documentation, verifying every transaction to ensure the upstream data matches the downstream physical reality. This creates a rigid structural dependency. Upstream value creation cannot happen without downstream demand signals, and downstream fulfillment is impossible without upstream execution. A bottleneck in either direction, whether it is a physical cargo delay moving downstream or an information blind spot moving upstream, causes the entire interconnected system to stall. Because the system is highly interdependent, each party has distinct accountabilities. The supplier acts as the input enabler, and their primary measure of success is on-time delivery and strict quality control. The manufacturer serves as the value transformer. Their performance is judged on production throughput, material yield, and maintaining target unit costs. Distributors are often misunderstood in this model as optional warehouses that add unnecessary overhead and cost. In reality, the distributor is a critical flow optimizer. Their success is measured by inventory turnover and their ability to fulfill local orders rapidly. They exist to solve the problem of variability. By holding inventory closer to the market, distributors decouple the steady, rigid pace of manufacturing from the unpredictable spikes of customer demand, absorbing the volatility so the factory doesn't have to. The customer, whether a massive retail chain or an individual shopper, operates as the demand driver. The customer triggers every upstream action through their demand signals and payment, making them a functional part of the chain's internal mechanics. Each node owns a distinct, non-overlapping segment of the system's overall performance. When a company blurs these roles or ignores its core function, the entire workflow loses efficiency. While these 4 core functions are strict, the labels we apply to these companies are not fixed. The terms supplier and customer are relative. They are contextual roles defined entirely by the specific transaction taking place at any given moment. This chart mapping supplier and customer changes shows the first handoff. Here, the raw material producer is the supplier, and the manufacturing plant purchasing those materials acts as their customer. Move one step down the chain and the relationship shifts entirely. That same manufacturer is now acting as the supplier, selling their finished goods to the wholesale distributor, who is now the customer. This dynamic repeats at every single node. The wholesaler acts as a supplier to the retail store, and finally, the retail store supplies the consumer household. This constant shifting of roles requires perfectly aligned data handoffs. A disruption at any single transfer point distorts the information for every subsequent partner. Ultimately, it is this continuous chain of relational microtransactions that binds completely independent corporate entities into a single unified network. This chart shows how historical managers focused on independent operations, while a modern end-to-end supply chain operates as one streamlined workflow. Decision-makers use complete upstream and downstream data to oversee the entire process, rather than relying on isolated metrics. This graphic detailing the levels of logistics management shows how the distributor role has evolved to handle this holistic workflow. Simple warehouses have become complex third, fourth, and fifth-party logistics providers, managing entire global networks. But executing this level of integration exposes a major operational challenge: systemic misalignment. When integration fails, companies revert to local optimization. This occurs when one party maximizes its own specific KPIs, like a factory overproducing to artificially lower unit costs at the direct expense of the rest of the chain. This lack of coordination, combined with delayed information, generates the bullwhip effect. A tiny fluctuation in customer demand becomes heavily distorted as it travels back up the chain, leading to massive inventory surpluses or severe shortages for the suppliers. An inefficiency or a quick fix implemented in one isolated step will inevitably cascade, creating compounding failures throughout the entire process. The entire system rests on 4 pillars: the supplier, the manufacturer, the distributor, and the customer. They operate on a strict bidirectional track. Physical value and cargo move downstream, while critical information and cash must move upstream. Individual corporate success is secondary. Cost, delivery speed, and market resilience are determined strictly by how effectively these 4 parties coordinate from end to end.